I could not breathe. My lungs felt as though they were slowly filling with wet concrete as I stood against the polished mahogany paneling at the back of Solus Innovation's primary boardroom. I was watching 8 grueling months of my life, my proprietary neural algorithms, my mathematical breakthroughs, and my late-night coding sessions being displayed on the 70-inch presentations screen by colleagues who could not even spell the underlying data structures. At the front of the room stood Harlan Croft, my vice president of engineering, beaming with smug self-assurance as if he had personally written every line of software architecture in the proposal. As you can see, our elite senior team at Solus has engineered a revolutionary dynamic logistics engine, Harlan announced, gesturing expansively to the 5 project managers and business developers sitting around the table. He did not look at me once. He did not even acknowledge the shadow standing in the corner of the room. My name is Vance Eldridge. I am 49 years old, and until that freezing Tuesday morning, I had spent 11 years of my professional life believing that quiet dedication, technical excellence, and flawless execution would eventually earn a man his rightful place at the corporate table. I was the lead systems architect at Solus Innovations, a mid-sized technological solutions firm based in Virginia that specialized in enterprise software and logistics automation. Over 11 long years, I had built the core technical infrastructure that kept the company afloat. Yet, because I chose to focus on raw code, algorithm optimization, and system stability rather than golf outings and corporate politics, management viewed me as an invisible workhorse. When Astraea Global Logistics issued their international request for proposals 8 months ago, nobody in the engineering division wanted to touch it. Astraea was a massive multinational freight conglomerate operating across 40 countries, and their requirements were brutal. They demanded an automated neural optimization engine capable of predicting global shipping disruptions, recalibrating real-time cargo routes across air and sea lanes, and cutting operational fuel expenditures by 36% annually. The contract was valued at $8,400,000, making it the single largest commercial deal in Solus history. But the technical parameters were so extreme that industry analysts had publicly declared the timeline impossible. Harlan Croft had literally tossed the project binder onto my desk during a department meeting 8 months earlier. "Vance, see if you can make any sense of this complex disaster," he had sneered, his voice dripping with condescending skepticism. My colleagues had exchanged amused, knowing glances, silently relieved that the suicidal assignment had fallen onto my shoulders. For 8 months, I lived and breathed that project. I canceled my anniversary dinner with my wife, missed my daughter's high school track championship, and slept on the threadbare couch in my office 3 nights a week. During the 5th month of development, I contracted severe bronchitis that left me coughing up blood into paper towels. I hid deep in my desk drawer, but I refused to take a single day off. I constructed the neural routing engine from scratch, writing thousands of lines of customized Python and C++ algorithms that solved stochastic route modeling challenges that had stumped enterprise developers for a decade. The breakthrough moment occurred at 2:15 in the morning on a rainy Thursday in November. I was sitting alone in the dark office, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups and scribbled whiteboards, when the predictive engine finally achieved a 0.002 error variance. The algorithm reduced projected transoceanic shipping overhead by exactly 36% while maintaining absolute real-time fault tolerance. Tears of sheer exhaustion and relief washed down my face. I immediately picked up my phone and called my wife, my hands trembling violently as I tried to explain the mathematical breakthrough in simple terms. She did not understand the advanced tensor calculus, but she heard the raw emotion in my voice. "They will finally have to recognize your brilliance now, Vance," she had whispered softly over the line. "You have sacrificed so much for that company, and now they will have no choice but to give you the credit and the promotion you deserve." I wanted to believe my wife. I desperately wanted to believe that 11 years of loyalty would finally mean something. But 2 weeks before the mandatory executive sign-off presentation with Astraea's senior leadership, I noticed a subtle and sinister shift within the department. Harlan Croft began holding private strategic alignment sessions regarding the Estrella contract, meetings to which I was mysteriously never invited. Bradley Cross, a slick 32-year-old senior developer whose father sat on the local Chamber of Commerce, started lingering around my workstation, asking probing questions about my proprietary source code. Alicia Montgomery, a fast-talking business development director who had not written a single line of technical logic in her entire career, was suddenly put in charge of reviewing all client deliverables. I tried to reassure myself that this was merely standard corporate procedure, just senior management aligning their talking points before the major presentation. Then, late on the evening before the big board meeting, I discovered the final slide deck on the shared corporate network. I had not been asked to review it, which should have been my first warning sign. I opened the 42-page document on my monitor, and my heart sank into my stomach. As I scrolled through page after page of detailed technical architecture diagrams, process flowcharts, and algorithm benchmark results that I had spent 8 months crafting, my name was entirely absent. The presentation notes clearly assigned the technical deep dive to Bradley Cross, the operational strategy to Alicia Montgomery, and the crown jewel algorithm to Harlan Croft himself. My 8 months of agony, my intellectual property, and my personal sacrifice had been completely wiped clean from the record. The following morning, 1 hour before the client arrived, I walked into Harlan Croft's glass-walled corner office, holding a printed copy of the slides deck. "Harlan," I said, keeping my voice as calm and professional as possible. Despite the rage burning in my chest, I noticed that my name has been left off every technical page in this deck. I spent 8 months building this neural engine from the ground up. This documentation needs to correctly reflect my role as the lead architect. Harlan did not even bother looking up from his smartphone. He slowly swallowed a sip of dark roast coffee, leaned back in his leather executive chair, and let out a long, patronizing sigh that cut deeper than any insult. "Vance," he said, his tone dripping with fake managerial empathy, "this is an executive suite presentation for an $8 million client. We need polished, dynamic communicators handling the stage today. You are a behind-the-scenes backroom programmer. You are simply not built for the executive spotlight." "It is my work, Harlan," I insisted, hating the subtle tremor of frustration in my voice. "Every algorithm, every routing model, every fail-safe protocol in this deck came out of my brain." He finally set his phone down, his eyes turning cold and dismissive. "It is Solus Innovations' work, Vance. We are a unified corporate team here, and teams win together. Besides, let us be perfectly frank. Look at your suit. Look at your posture. You do not possess the executive presence or C-suite polish required for client-facing leadership. You are 50 years old, Vance, and you are great at coding in the basement. Let the professionals handle the boardroom." I walked out of his office feeling as though I had been punched in the throat. 11 years of dedication, an advanced master's degree in computer engineering from Georgia Tech, and months of destroyed health, discarded as worthless because I did not wear $3,000 tailored suits or indulge in corporate brown-nosing. That brings me back to the freezing mahogany boardroom, standing motionless against the back wall like an uninvited ghost. Sitting around the massive oval conference table were the top executives from Estrella Global Logistics, led by their formidable chief executive officer, Eleanor Thorne. Eleanor was a razor-sharp woman in her mid-50s, notorious across the maritime logistics industry for her sharp mind, unyielding standards, and zero tolerance for corporate fluff. Beside her sat Estrella's chief financial officer and their senior vice president of supply operations. Harlan Croft stood at the pod, clicking through my slide deck with practiced ease, smoothly taking credit for every breakthrough. Bradley Cross sat at the table nodding arrogantly, pretending to be the master architect, while Alicia Montgomery chimed in with buzzwords like synergistic paradigms and holistic cloud integrations. Eleanor Thorne listened in complete silence. For 20 minutes, her sharp blue eyes tracking every slide with terrifying intensity. She was taking meticulous notes in a leather ledger. Suddenly, she held up a single hand, bringing Harlan's slick presentation to an abrupt halt. "Mr. Croft," Eleanor said, her voice quiet yet carrying an undeniable authority that instantly froze the room, Your high-level overview is very entertaining, but I did not fly my executive team here for marketing rhetoric. Let us talk about real technical architecture. Page 24 of your proposal highlights a dynamic routing algorithm that claims a 36% reduction in ocean freight delays. How exactly does your system process real-time meteorological disruptions in the North Atlantic shipping corridors without causing cascading database locks in your central routing matrix? The question hung in the air like a heavy fog. Harlan Croft froze, his polished smile faltering for a fraction of a second. He glanced frantically toward Bradley Cross, silently pleading for help. Bradley cleared his throat, adjusting his expensive silk tie as sweat began to glisten on his forehead. "Well, Miss Thorne," Bradley stammers, attempting to sound authoritative while regurgitating meaningless jargon, "we utilize a multi-layered Bayesian probability matrix that dynamically reroute traffic based on real-time data inputs from our centralized server farm." Eleanor Thorne's brow furrowed, her eyes narrowing with distinct irritation. A Bayesian matrix would experience exponential processing latency under high-frequency weather flux, she countered flatly. That would crash your system within 3 hours of severe Atlantic storm activity. Are you telling me your team built an $8 million system on basic Bayesian probability? Harlan Croft looked as though he was about to faint. Alicia Montgomery stared blankly at her notebook, completely out of her depth. The entire Solus executive team was drowning in front of their biggest potential client, exposed for knowing absolutely nothing about the technology they claimed to have built. I stood in the back of the room, watching the disastrous train wreck unfold. For 11 years I had kept my mouth shut. For 11 years I had allowed lesser men to walk over me. But standing there, watching my life's work being bastardized and ruined by arrogant pretenders, something fundamental snapped inside me. The fear of confrontation that had bound me for over a decade vanished, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. I stepped away from the cold back wall and walked down the center aisle of the boardroom, my leather shoes striking the hardwood floor with firm, deliberate steps. "The core matrix does not rely on static Bayesian estimation," I announced clearly, my voice ringing through the silent room with calm, unshakable confidence. "We developed a custom stochastic tensor feedback loop that operates directly on edge nodes. When severe meteorological anomalies occur in the North Atlantic corridor, the system isolates local route vectors and executes predictive recalculations in less than 12 milliseconds, eliminating central database locks entirely." Every head in the room spun toward me. Harlan Croft's face turned a horrifying shade of deep purple, his eyes wide with fury and panic. Bradley Cross looked as if he had just seen a ghost. But Eleanor Thorne did not look angry. She sat up straight in her chair, her sharp eyes fixing on me with intense curiosity. "And who might you be?" Eleanor asked, leaning forward across the mahogany table. Before I could speak, Harlan Croft hurriedly jumped in, his voice strained and desperate as he tried to push me back into the shadows. "Oh, that is just Vance," Harlan stammered, forced chuckles echoing nervously. "Vance is one of our senior back-end coders who assisted with some of the minor script formatting for the project." "Please ignore the interruption, Miss Thorne." "Assisted with minor formatting," I repeated, stepping directly up to the edge of the conference table and looking Eleanor Thorne dead in the eye. "That is factually incorrect, Mr. Croft. I am Vance Eldridge, lead systems architect at Solus Innovations. I am the sole author of this neural engine. I spent the last 8 months designing every data pipeline, writing over 100,000 lines of core C++ logic, and proving the underlying mathematical theorems. The architecture you are reviewing on that screen is entirely my intellectual creation." The silence that descended upon the boardroom was deafening. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit 30 feet away. Harlan Croft looked as though he wanted to physically tackle me out of the room, while Bradley Cross stared down at his shoes in absolute humiliation. Eleanor Thorne slowly set her gold fountain pen down on her ledger. She looked at Harlan Croft, then at Bradley, and finally back at me. A faint, knowing smile touched the corners of her lips. "Is that so?" Eleanor said softly. "Well, Mr. Croft, it appears there has been a significant miscommunication regarding technical leadership. Since Mr. Eldridge actually built the system, I would prefer to hear the remainder of the presentation directly from him. For the next 45 minutes, the executive boardroom transformed into my masterclass. I took the remote control directly from Harlan Croft's numb fingers and navigated through the technical architecture of the neural engine. Without referring to a single note or slide cheat sheet, I explained every complex algorithm, every database optimization, and every fail-safe contingency I had engineered over the past 8 months. I answered Eleanor Thorne's probing technical questions with effortless precision, illustrating mathematical formulas on the digital whiteboard, and breaking down the complex logistics models into crystal-clear operational strategies. Eleanor's executive team took furious notes, nodding in visible admiration as I systematically dismantled every concern they had harbored about the project. Harlan Croft and his hand-picked presenters sat in absolute silence along the side wall, completely paralyzed. They could not interject, they could not add commentary, and they could not clarify a single point because they did not possess the fundamental technical knowledge to understand what I was explaining. When I finally concluded the presentation with a live demonstration of real-time route optimization, Eleanor Thorne stood up from her chair and began to slowly clap her hands. "Exceptional," Eleanor declared, her voice echoing through the room. "Absolutely exceptional, Mr. Eldridge. That was the most brilliant technical presentation I have witnessed in my 25 years in logistics." She turned her gaze toward Harlan Croft, whose face was pale and slick with nervous sweat. "Mr. Croft," Eleanor said, her tone suddenly turning cold and businesslike, "Stretch Global Logistics is prepared to move forward with the $8,400,000 contract. However, we have strict corporate governance protocols that must be satisfied before a single dollar is transferred." Harlan gasped with relief, his eyes lighting up as he saw the massive commission check within reach. "Of course, Miss Thorne. We will have our corporate legal team draft the final signature documents immediately." "Not so fast, Mr. Croft," Eleanor interrupted, raising her hand to stop him. "Under federal procurement guidelines and Australia's mandatory technical compliance framework, the individual who designed and authored the core system architecture must execute a sworn, legally binding technical specification attachment under penalty of federal perjury. Furthermore, under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, public commercial contracts involving custom neural software require verified intellectual property authorship disclosure to ensure no future copyright disputes arise. In short, the contract requires Mr. Vance Eldridge's personal signature as the verified lead architect. Without his personal signature on the technical compliance documentation, this contract is legally void from the beginning under the doctrine of material fraud." Harlan Croft looked as though he had been struck by lightning. "What?" Harlan choked out, his voice cracking. "However, our corporate policy dictates that executive officers sign all client contracts. Vance is an employee. His work belongs to Solus." Eleanor Thorne picked up her leather briefcase and closed it with a sharp snap. "Your internal employee contracts are your business, Mr. Croft. But Australia's policy is non-negotiable. We do not risk $8 million on enterprise software without the primary author personally certifying the technical specifications. If Mr. Eldridge does not sign as the primary technical authority, there is no deal." She walked around the table, stopped directly in front of me, and pulled a heavy metallic business card from her suit pocket. "Mr. Eldridge," Eleanor said, handing me the card with a warm, respectful smile, "my direct private phone line is on the back. If you encounter any corporate impediments regarding your sign-off on these technical specifications, I expect you to call me directly. Good day, gentlemen." With that, Eleanor Thorne and her executive delegation walked out of the boardroom, leaving a trail of stunned silence behind them. The moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut, Harlan Croft turned on me like a rabid dog, his face distorted with terrifying fury. "You arrogant, insubordinate bastard!" Harlan screamed, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table so hard that water glasses rattled. "You just tried to sabotage an $8 million company deal to satisfy your pathetic little ego. You are finished at Solus. Do you hear me? You are completely finished." I looked at Harlan Croft's red, sweating face, then at Bradley Cross shrinking into his chair, and finally down at Eleanor Thorne's metallic business card in my hand. For 11 years, I would have trembled under Harlan's wrath. I would have apologized, backed down, and begged for my job. But something inside me had fundamentally altered. I felt no fear, no anxiety, and no hesitation. I slowly put Eleanor's card into my jacket pocket, looked Harlan Croft directly in the eyes, and smiled. "If I am finished, Harlan," I said calmly, "then so is your $8 million contract. Because without my signature on those federal compliance documents, Estrella walks away, and your board of directors will be asking why you lost the largest contract in company history." I turned around and walked out of the boardroom, leaving Harlan standing in silent horror. That night, I did not sleep a single minute. But I was not panicking. I was working with calculated precision. I sat at my home kitchen table surrounded by 11 years of employment documentation, performance reviews, patent filings, and legal notes. I reviewed Solus Innovation's corporate bylaws and consulted with Donald Prescott, an old friend who specialized in federal intellectual property law and employment rights. Donald confirmed what Eleanor Thorne had implied. Solus had attempted to file the Estrella contract using federal standard forms that required sworn technical authorship disclosure. Furthermore, because I had published an academic white paper on neural stochastic routing 3 years prior to joining Solus, I held documented prior intellectual property rights that Solus had never formally purchased. If Harlan Croft attempted to forge my signature or substitute Bradley Cross as the author, Solus would be committing federal procurement fraud and willful copyright infringement under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106. By 4 o'clock in the morning, I had drafted a formal 4-page legal memorandum outlining my non-negotiable terms for executing the Estrella technical compliance documents. I printed 3 copies, placed them in crisp white envelopes, and arrived at Solus Innovations at precisely 8 o'clock the following morning. As expected, within 10 minutes of my arrival, I was summoned to the main executive conference room. Sitting at the table were Harlan Croft, Vice President of Human Resources Terrence Miller, and Solus Senior Legal Counsel. Harlan looked exhausted, dark circles bruised beneath his eyes, but his expression was hardened with hostility. "Vance," HR Director Terrence Miller began, adopting a stern, authoritative tone designed to intimidate lower-level staff, "your behavior in front of Estrella Global Logistics yesterday was a catastrophic breach of professional ethics and company protocol. You embarrassed your superiors and disrupted corporate alignment. Under normal circumstances, this would result in immediate summary termination for gross insubordination. However, given the client's unusual signature requirement, management is prepared to offer you a resolution." Harlan Croft slid a single-page document across the table toward me. It was a standard corporate release offering me a one-time performance bonus of $5,000 in exchange for immediately signing the Estrella compliance documents and relinquishing all technical attribution claims. I did not even touch the paper. Instead, I reached into my briefcase, pulled out my prepared envelopes, and slid 1 copy to Harlan, 1 to Terrence, and 1 to the corporate attorney. "These are my non-negotiable terms for executing the technical compliance documentation," I stated flatly. Harlan scoffed, tearing open the envelope with aggressive movements. "Let us see what ludicrous fantasy you have cooked up," he muttered. But as his eyes scanned down the page, his face slowly drained of all color. My terms were crystal clear. First, formal corporate recognition as the sole lead architect of the Estrella neural system across all public, internal, and legal documentation. Second, total operational authority over the technical implementation team, with absolute veto power over project personnel, meaning Bradley Cross and Alicia Montgomery were permanently removed from my division. Third, an immediate 30% salary adjustment, raising my base pay to $185,000 annually to match the market rate for senior systems architects. Fourth, a written corporate guarantee of non-retaliation signed by the chief executive officer. "This is outright extortion," Harlan roared, slamming the pages onto the table. "You are an employee. You cannot dictate terms to executive management. We will fire you right now and have Bradley sign the documents as secondary architect." Solus Corporate Legal Counsel slowly raised a hand, interrupting Harlan's outburst. The attorney looked at me, then turned to Harlan with a deeply troubled expression. "Harlan, shut up," the attorney said quietly. "He is right. If we fire Vance today, we cannot legally execute the federal compliance attachments without his sworn signature. If Bradley signs, Astria's legal team will verify the underlying patent history, discover Vance's prior academic copyright, and terminate the contract for material misrepresentation. Furthermore, under federal whistleblower provisions, if Vance reports this to federal auditors, Solis could face debarment from all government enterprise contracting." Harlan Croft stared at his lawyer in absolute shock, his jaw hanging open. Terrence Miller from HR swallowed hard, nervously clearing his throat. "So, what you are saying is we have no legal leverage?" Terrence asked faintly. "None whatsoever," the attorney replied grimly. "Vance holds all the cards. If we want the $8,400,000 contract, we sign his terms." The silence in the conference room was intoxicating. For 11 years, these men had treated me like an invisible utility, taking my labor, stealing my ideas, and discarding my dignity. Now they were trapped in a legal cage of their own making. Harlan Croft looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, his hands trembling as he picked up his pen. "You will pay for this, Vance," Harlan whispered savagely. "I will make sure your career in this industry is destroyed." I looked back at him with icy indifference. "You have until 12 o'clock noon to return those documents signed by the CEO, Harlan. If they are not on my desk by noon, I call Eleanor Thorne and inform her that Solis is unable to fulfill the technical compliance mandates." 10 minutes before noon, Terrence Miller personally delivered the fully executed agreement to my desk, signed by Solis Chief Executive Officer. Over the next 4 months, I executed the Astrea Neurologistic deployment with ruthless efficiency. Operating as the official lead systems architect, I purged the toxic dead weight from the project team. I banished Bradley Cross and Alicia Montgomery to low-level administrative duties, and instead recruited 2 brilliant, overlooked junior developers, an ambitious young woman named Clara and a quiet back-end coder named Marcus, who had been languishing in the corporate basement just as I once had. I mentored them, elevated their work, and ensured their names were prominently featured on every module submission. Working together, our team deployed the neural optimization engine 3 weeks ahead of schedule. When Astrea integrated the software into their global fleet operations, the real-time results were astounding. Fuel consumption plummeted by 38%, ocean transit delays dropped by 42%, and Astrea saved over $12 million in operational overhead within the very first quarter. At the formal project completion gala hosted at Astrea's grand headquarters in downtown Chicago, Eleanor Thorne took the main stage before hundreds of industry leaders and corporate executives. She delivered a glowing speech celebrating the unprecedented success of the neurologistics engine. Standing at the front of the auditorium, she publicly called me to the stage, presenting me with Astrea's prestigious Global Innovation Award while the room erupted in a standing ovation. Harlan Croft sat at a table in the back of the hall, forced to clap along with the crowd, his face twisted in bitter resentment as he watched me receive the highest honor in the industry. The morning after the gala, Eleanor Thorne invited me to a private breakfast at her executive suite overlooking Lake Michigan. Over coffee, she set a thick blue folder on the table between us. "Vance, your work on our platform has been nothing short of miraculous," Eleanor said, her voice filled with deep respect. "But I know what kind of environment you are working in at Solis. Harlan Croft is a parasite who will continue to undermine you the moment our contract wrap-up is complete. Men like him never change. You have outgrown Solis Innovations, Vance." I looked at the blue folder. "What is this, Eleanor?" I asked. "That is an official executive offer from Astrea Global Logistics," she replied softly. "We are establishing a brand new autonomous technology and neural systems division. We want you to join us as Vice President of Engineering. The package includes a base salary of $240,000 annually, executive equity stock options, a $50,000 signing bonus, and complete budget authority to build a team of 12 engineers from scratch. You will report directly to me." My heart thundered in my chest. It was the dream role I had spent 20 years striving for, offered to me not through corporate politics, but through undeniable technical mastery and unwavering self-respect. I accept, Eleanor, I said without a single second of hesitation, but I have one condition. I want to bring Clara and Marcus with me. Eleanor smiled warmly. Consider them hired. 2 weeks later, I walked into Solus Innovations for the final time. I handed my formal letter of resignation directly to HR, packed my personal belongings into a single cardboard box, and walked out the front doors without looking back. Clara and Marcus submitted their resignations the following day, joining my new division at Astria. Without my technical leadership and algorithm maintenance, the engineering division at Solus Innovations rapidly deteriorated. Within 6 months, Solus failed to deliver on 2 major enterprise software contracts due to catastrophic system crashes that Bradley Cross was utterly incapable of fixing. Client after client abandoned Solus, transferring their business to Astria's new technology division. Within 1 year, Solus Innovations reported a devastating operational loss of $30 million. An internal emergency audit conducted by Solus Board of Directors exposed widespread management corruption, credit theft, and incompetent leadership. Harlan Croft was stripped of his executive VP title and demoted to a low-level regional sales supervisor, his reputation in the tech industry completely destroyed. 2 years after leaving Solus, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the International Logistics and Neural Computing Summit in San Francisco. Standing on the main auditorium stage before 2,000 engineers and executives, I spoke passionately about algorithmic integrity, technical empowerment, and the vital necessity of protecting intellectual property in the digital age. As I scanned the vast audience, my eyes caught a familiar figure sitting in the very back row. It was Harlan Croft. He looked older, broken, and defeated, wearing a faded off-the-rack suit sent by Solus as a low-level attendee to take basic notes on industry trends. Our eyes met across the crowded auditorium for a brief moment. 2 years earlier, that man had held the power to terrify me, to diminish me, and to steal my life's work. Now, looking at him from the keynote podium, I felt no anger, no hatred, and no desire for petty vengeance. All I felt was absolute, unshakable indifference. He no longer possessed any power over my life, my career, or my self-worth. After my speech concluded to thunderous applause, a young developer approached me at the edge of the stage, holding a notebook nervously. "Mr. Eldridge, your presentation was inspiring," the young man whispered, his eyes filled with anxiety. "I am facing a situation right now where my manager is taking full credit for my algorithms and erasing my name. I do not know what to do. I am afraid if I speak up, I will lose everything." I looked at the young engineer, recognizing the exact same fear that had kept me silent for 11 long years. I reached out, placed a firm hand on his shoulder, and looked him straight in the eye. "Listen to me very carefully, son," I said softly. "Your talent has immense value, your intellect has value, and your voice has value. Do not ever let insecure managers convince you that you are invisible. Stand up for your work, document your legal rights, and never settle for less than you deserve. Success is not just about advancing your own career. The ultimate victory is creating a world where no young engineer ever has to suffer in silence again." Subscribe if this story resonated with your journey, and always remember, your worth is non-negotiable.